Hello everybody, and welcome to a brand new video series here on the channel, Daily Card Breakdown. Today we are going to be looking at the card Ill-Gotten Inheritance and analyzing it specifically in the context of draft. Ill-Gotten Inheritance was an incredibly controversial card earlier in the format, and so I just wanted to take some time to talk about the card, and hopefully that can help you both play the card correctly and also help you with your future card evaluation skills, even if you don't agree with everything I say. Hopefully you find something helpful, and let's get right into it. First up, Ill-Gotten Inheritance is 3 and a black for an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, Ill-Gotten Inheritance deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life, and it has the ability 5 and a black, sacrifice Ill-Gotten Inheritance, it deals 4 damage to target opponent and you gain 4 life. Now when you see a card like Ill-Gotten Inheritance, the first thing you need to be thinking is, what type of deck do I want to play it in? Do I want to play it in a control deck, an aggro deck, or a mid-range deck? And most decks in Limited tend to be more mid-rangey, but you can always have a slant to your deck, more controlling, more aggressive. And Ill-Gotten Inheritance definitely falls into the camp of being more playable in an aggressive deck. Why? Because it doesn't affect the board at all, so if you start to fall behind and you play Ill-Gotten Inheritance, it does very little to help you recover. If your opponent has a couple creatures in play and you play Ill-Gotten Inheritance, you can't trade with their creatures, you can't potentially stonewall their creatures, and so therefore Ill-Gotten Inheritance is much better in a deck where you're already ahead, and therefore the inability to block is not as relevant. Ill-Gotten Inheritance is also much better when your opponent's at a lower life total, because each point of damage that it's chipping away is getting them closer down to 0, and also the 4 damage is getting closer to being lethal. And that is why I believe that Ill-Gotten Inheritance is only really playable in an aggressive strategy and not in the mid-range shells that a lot of the time people slot it into, because in a mid-range deck you can't really guarantee that you're going to be ahead in a lot of games. I mean, you can't really guarantee that in an aggressive deck either, because you will have bad draws in Limited, but in a mid-range deck specifically, the whole point is that you adapt your game plan based on what you draw. And if you have Ill-Gotten Inheritance in your deck, and you draw this in the games where you fall behind, then you're just going to actually lose those games a larger portion of the time, because you've wasted essentially a big turn. Turn 4 is a big turn in Limited to play a big creature like a 3/4 or a 4/4 or just a 2/3 flyer maybe with Afterlife 1 in the case of Syndicate Messenger or some effect like that, and you've used this big turn to play a 4-mana enchantment that did nothing to stop your opponent when your opponent was attacking you and beating you down. And that's why Ill-Gotten Inheritance, I think, is not very good in mid-range decks. Now, I think one of the problems with Ill-Gotten Inheritance and why people have been so quick to call it just a great card in general, in mid-range decks even, is because when you lose to Ill-Gotten Inheritance, it feels like you're losing specifically to Ill-Gotten Inheritance, when in reality, you lost to your opponent that played an aggressive game plan and executed it well and then finished you off with Ill-Gotten Inheritance. And the card that does the finishing blow oftentimes feels like it did all of the work. So if your opponent gets you down to 6 life and then plays Ill-Gotten Inheritance, you're like, wow, I lose. And then pretend you play a creature that stops all your opponent's creatures from attacking, and the Ill-Gotten Inheritance is slowly poking you down, and then you end up losing the game to Ill-Gotten Inheritance. It feels like you lost specifically to Ill-Gotten Inheritance, when in reality you just lost to an aggressive opponent that played Ill-Gotten Inheritance as a finisher. In a similar vein, it would be as if your opponent got you to 5 life and then Lightning Axed you, and you're like, oh no, Lightning Axe is overpowered, and then you start playing Lightning Axe, which is, for those who don't know, 5 mana, deal 5 damage to the target player, so doesn't hit creatures, and then you start playing that in just your mid-range decks and because you think it's just the greatest thing ever. Ill-Gotten Inheritance is the type of card that is much better in an aggressive strategy and much worse in a mid-range strategy. Now, I've already talked about a lot of the downsides. It's bad tempo. It puts you down a card a lot of the time, because in more mid-rangey matchups, a lot of the time you're going to both be at high life totals, and you really just care about card advantage. And another thing to keep in mind is that there is some life gain in the set. There's not a ton, which kind of helps Ill-Gotten Inheritance, but there is some life gain. So if you play against an Orzhov opponent, they will have Grasping Thrills in their deck probably, which gains them 2 life, and that just kind of slows down Ill-Gotten Inheritance a significant amount. The biggest pro of Ill-Gotten Inheritance is that it's really hard to interact with, and it makes your opponent ask some very tough questions. The questions that it usually makes them ask is, can I kill Ill-Gotten Inheritance? Can I kill my opponent before Ill-Gotten Inheritance kills me? Or can I gain life? And those are the big 3 questions. And a lot of the time, they're not going to be able to gain life. Certain color combinations literally can't. In Ravnica Allegiance draft, there's really not any enchantment removal other than Mortify, so usually that's going to be a no. So they have to decide, can I kill my opponent? And the reason why Ill-Gotten Inheritance is much better in aggressive decks is because a lot of the time they can't attack you, because you have, say, 3 creatures in play that they've now stonewalled with their bigger creatures. But if they attack you for 10 damage, you just attack them back for 6 and then now they're dead, or something of that nature. So the fact that you've gotten them to a low life total with your good aggressive deck has really made Ill-Gotten Inheritance a much better card. And that's why I think it is definitely a playable card. I started off thinking it was unplayable, but in the aggressive decks, it is a nice way to finish the game. Now, what type of deck do you want to be playing Ill-Gotten Inheritance in? Ideally, a deck that has Ill-Gotten Inheritance as its most expensive card, and ideally a deck that's pretty much all creatures, and there's not a lot of fluff in the deck other than Ill-Gotten Inheritance, because you don't want to have opening hands that have 2 or 3 cards like Ill-Gotten Inheritance that don't affect the board, that don't put you ahead, and that don't like deal consistent damage. You want to be going 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop Ill-Gotten Inheritance or something like that. You want to be playing early creatures and then finishing them off with Ill-Gotten Inheritance, because if you play Ill-Gotten Inheritance and your opponent's at 15, it's much worse than if you play Ill-Gotten Inheritance and your opponent's at 10. You need to have pressure in order to maximize Ill-Gotten Inheritance. So that's going to do it for this card analysis. I really hope you enjoyed it. Leave in the comment section down below what you thought of the review. Also, what cards you'd like to see me review in the future. Be sure to hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and be sure to subscribe to get updates whenever I post new content, including future daily card breakdowns. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.